Hello, everyone, and welcome to A New Direction. My name is Jay Izzo, and oh man, do we have another great show for you. Let me ask you a question. Business, personal life, right? We're going to look at both. We're going to focus on business, of course, in the show today. But I want to ask you a question. How's your communication with those around you? Let's start in business, right? I don't want to get too personal, right? I like getting personal, but we don't want to get too personal right now. In your business, would you say to me on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being miserable, 10 being it just doesn't get any better, that you have great trust throughout your entire organization? Yes or no? I see you. Yeah, even you driving. Okay, I see the hand. Okay, good for you. Okay, so it's pretty low. Okay, good. All right. How about complete lack of fear in your organization? And that people can be honest about their fear. How's that going? Scale 1 to 10. Okay, I see some 2s, some 3s. Okay, all right. There's one person out there saying a 7. I'm not believing you. Okay, great. How about everybody knowing their why? Okay, scale 1 to 10. That everybody knows 10. Okay, fine. Right. Okay. So we got problems in the communication area in business. We typically do because, after all, humanly speaking, and as a psychological professional and coach, the fact of the matter is that we are generally not in alignment with ourselves. We generally think one thing, say one thing, and do another thing, right? We all know it's true. You walk into the restaurant and you say, you know what? We're not getting the dessert tonight, right? You've made it up in your mind. We're not getting dessert tonight. We're going to eat the food. We're going to leave. And then they bring out the dessert tray and there's the key lime pie. It looks fantastic. And you go, I'll have one of those, because your thoughts do not line up with our behavior, and neither do our words, by the way. So what do we do about it? Well, how do we fix this in business? How do we get these conversations to happen where we're actually being more productive? Which, by the way, more productivity means more what? Profitability, right? Yeah. So how do we get these conversations to happen? How do we work through them? Well, it takes some work, and it's going to take this book, I believe. It's called Agile Conversations. It's Transform Your Conversations, Transform Your Culture, written by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Frederick. Douglas Squirrel, who, by the way, goes by Squirrel, is going to be joining us today. It's an outstanding book. I got to tell you something. One of the most difficult books. I told my wife, at least on 2 or 3 occasions, this was a hard book. But because it requires you to be honest and vulnerable and real and dig. And those things are not easy for any of us to do. But if you're willing to do the work, boy, there's value on the other side of it. So much value on the other side of it. And that's what's great about this book. Before we get to him, let's do what we do every week, right? We're 4-part people. We're physical, mental, emotional, spiritual people. And the fact of the matter is, we never stay static. If we're not growing, we're dying in all those areas. We have to be working on ourselves every single day. So we'll have you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being it doesn't get any worse. 10 means it doesn't get any better. 5 being average. In each area. And what I do is I have you go, okay. So for instance, physically, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? Say, eating right, getting enough exercise, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, taking care of yourself physically. How would you rate yourself, right? 5 being average. Now, if your number is a 2 or 3, I don't want you to be alarmed. What I want you to do is I want you to think of that as a starting point of how we can improve, right? By the way, one of the beautiful things about this book is that it takes practice. So it's about constant improvement. It's not about getting there in one take, all right? If we were to use the analogy of the movie, you don't get it right in one take. You're going to have to do it over and over and over again. You're going to think of it as a skill, like if you were a professional musician or a professional athlete, you have to develop the skill by practicing the skill. And this is true in terms of what we're talking about here physically. You want to get better, you're going to have to practice getting better physically, right? You have to practice it where exercise, eating right, drinking enough water, getting enough exercise, those type of things, okay? So on a scale of 1 to 10, what's that first number? Second number is the mental intellectual number, right? You can sit on all the books that you want. You will never absorb one thing from a book. You're going to have to be an active participant in your learning and in your wisdom and your growth and your knowledge and understanding. So a great way to improve your intellectual growth in all those areas is to read a book. This one's a good one. I would recommend Agile Conversations for Growth. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think you're doing mentally, intellectually? Right? All right, that's your second number. Third number is the emotional number. And the fact of the matter is, Dr. Daniel Goleman has written all sorts of things on emotional quotients, right? And by the way, I'm going to just tell you that what Squirrel and Jeff do in this book is they dance all over the emotional quotient. You're going to have some emotional intelligence here. And Daniel Goleman, talked about the emotional quotient. We break it down easy here in the show. Here's how I want you to evaluate yourself. First is, how well would you evaluate yourself when it comes to controlling your emotions under stress and pressure? And then the second is, how well are you able to tap into and understand the emotions of another person? Okay. You've got to combine the two. By the way, you're going to need that in Agile Conversations, by the way, because you're going to have to control yourself, right? But you also are going to have an emotional vocabulary large enough to be able to tap into and understand the emotions of another person, especially if you want to get this work done. Okay. So on a scale 1 to 10, how would you say you are there? All right. That's your third number. Fourth number is a spiritual number. And I know a lot of you are going to say to me, well, Jay, I'm not really all that spiritual. And in fact, I would even say, as I'm just not at that type of a person. Well, listen, we all live by faith. Okay. The fact of the matter is, we're all living that way. And you wake up in the morning, you sip your coffee, you believe it's not going to be poisonous. You push the button on your car, turn the key, believing it's going to start. You made plans in the future, believing they're going to happen. You walk across the street when the sign says walk, believing the cars aren't going to hit you. We're walking by faith every day. That is a spiritual concept. That is not a human concept. And the fact of the matter is, we connect with each other on a level that goes beyond our emotions and our mental and our physical being. And it really does. And we connect. We will say often, there's something about us that works, right? That's the spiritual part of us. And then what brings you back to center in the midst of chaos or in the midst of stress? Is it God? Is it nature? Or is it something else? And how's it working for you? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you evaluate yourself there in the spiritual area? Those 4 areas are like the air in the tires of your car. If one tire is too low, what happens? Well, it's hard to steer, makes the car difficult to drive, right? And if all 4 tires are too low, over time, you're going to ruin the car. So we want to bring our tires to the right heights. And so, speaking of someone who does that, his name is Douglas Squirrel, aka Squirrel. He has been coding for 40 years and has led software teams for 20. He uses the power of conversations to create dramatic productivity gains in technological organizations of all sizes. His experience includes growing software teams as a CTO in startups from fintech to biotech to music and everything in between, consulting on product improvement at over 200 organizations in the UK, US, Australia, Africa, and Europe, and coaching a wide variety of leaders in improving their conversations, aligning to business goals, and creating productive conflict. He lives in Frogholt. I think I said that right. Did I not? Close. Okay, good. Frogholt, England, in a timber-framed cottage built in the year 1450, which has got to be so cool. He is the author of Squirrel's Tech, Radar, Decoding Tech Talk, and Agile Conversations, Transforming Conversations, Transforming Culture, co-authored with Jeffrey Frederick. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Welcome to the first time to A New Direction. Squirrel, welcome to A New Direction, brother.
Hello, sir. Great to hear such a fabulous introduction.
Thank you. I'm not going to get right into the first chapter because you give us a great history in the first chapter. I do want to talk about, though, a little bit about something that you said in the introduction that I would like to kind of hit. And that is because you do address the fact that you say employees' frustration, they have a frustration at their inability to change things that exist at all levels in almost all organizations that you've worked with. And you feel their empathy because you yourself have been stuck in the same pattern. And so you see this as an alternative to help create conversations. So you see this, and I talked about it briefly, as we become more skillful at conversations, I'm quoting you, we become more aware of what we think and feel and why we think and feel the way we do. So talk us through why it's so important, because I think it sets off the rest of the book. It's so important why we become more aware of what we think and how we think and why we think and feel the way we do in having these productive conversations.
Well, that's the thing that trips us up. And you told me before we started that you'd actually done something a lot of people don't do with my book, which is to sit down and actually write down your conversation and analyze it.
Mm.
And like you talked about in the beginning, practicing your conversation is like practicing race walking. I don't know if you were watching the Olympics, but did you notice there are those people who walk at an incredible pace?
Yes, yes.
And guess what? They practice, and they can walk faster than you and I can run.
Right,
But
right,
they
right.
have to practice really hard at this skill that we all learned when we were 2. And they're much, much better at it than we are.
Yes,
And
they
as a
are.
result, they're fit and they're healthy and they're moving fast, and and they're winning medals, right?
Right,
So
right.
in a very similar way, we all think we know how to have conversations. We all think we know what we're thinking and what's occurring to us, and we all think that we're being inclusive and building trust and getting commitment, and we're doing all those wonderful things. But then when you actually write down the conversation, I bet you found this. I thought I was building a ton of trust here. And I noticed I said this really stupid thing, and I thought exactly the opposite. I said, I really like what you did yesterday, and I actually thought it sucked.
Right.
And that happens over and over and over again because we don't have in the moment the access to the thoughts and feelings. As you write it down in the book, you find that we call it the left-hand column, the things that you are thinking and feeling but not saying.
Right.
And because we don't have access to those in the moment, we're not skilled. We're like the normal walkers that we all are, instead of the race walkers who are really skilled and able to do something that normal people can't. And therefore, we can't react in the moment to what we're thinking and feeling and find a way to share it that's productive. It probably wouldn't be so helpful to say, everything you did yesterday, Jay, it sucked. But it might be helpful to say, the audience reaction just wasn't very good. I think yesterday's show really wasn't on par, and I think we should do something about that. What do you think, Jay? Right? That would be a way of sharing the thought and feeling that I have in a productive way, so we can have a conflict. And you can say, I thought it was awesome, and off to the races we go, right? We're doing something productive. Whereas if I just say, Jay, you're awesome, it was super yesterday. Oh boy, it really sucked. We haven't got anywhere, right? We haven't built any trust, because you'll figure out that I actually didn't like it. And we haven't moved forward on actually improving, whether it's improving my understanding or improving your delivery, right?
Right.
So that's why it's so important to get in touch with what you're actually thinking and feeling through practice.
I love that. In chapter 2, I'm going to skip chapter 1, which, by the way, is great, entitled Escaping the Software Factory, and Taylorism is really important here.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah, sure. Please do.
It's going to throw off some of your listeners. They're going to say, oh my God, this is an IT guy. He's going to talk all about computers and, servers and bits and bytes and stuff. The thing is, all these tools apply everywhere. Right. We happen to write for an audience that is using technology, not necessarily writing the technology, but you have all those crazy developers who usually are pretty bad at this stuff, right? They're the ones who are having the most challenge, because guess what? They like to talk to computers rather than humans. So this book is written for them to help them learn how to talk better and how to have better conversations and improve. And also for all of us who talk to IT people all the time. So it has an IT focus, but all of the skills are applicable elsewhere. So I just don't want anyone to be put off by my software background. I coach salespeople, I coach CEOs, I coach people all over the place. The book happens to be with an IT focus.
Yeah, and let me jump in with you on that, because I am in total agreement. The book, Agile Conversations is the name of the book, by the way, is, I told Squirrel this before the show, it could apply to your marriage. It could apply to any relationship that you have. It does not have to apply specifically to IT. It just happens to be the world that he lives in a little bit more frequently. But it's the book. No. The book was a challenge for me personally, and how I want to communicate better with the people I'm closest to, not just people that I coach and work with, or in the business that I'm in. It's applicable everywhere. So I want people to understand too that this book is absolutely a gem. It really, really is a gem. In chapter 2, you talk about improving your conversations, and we talk about our behavior does not often match our beliefs, which you alluded to here. But then you also walk us through real quickly that we have some flaws, and those flaws are our own cognitive biases. And we're going to see these come up throughout these 5 conversations that are so important. Talk us through some of these cognitive biases, not all of them, just a few of them that are really, really important for us to understand when it comes to having conversations that inhibit us from having the productive conversations we want to have.
Well, I'll tell you about my favorite one, which applies all over the place. I'll go to more if you want, but let me start with that one.
Okay.
And that is naive realism.
Yes.
And that's the deception, which it's almost impossible to avoid.
Mm.
And the deception is that you actually see and hear the world the way it actually is.
Mm.
And the problem is that, for example, Jay, you may or may not know this physically about your eyes, but as you're sitting here talking to me, you think you're looking at me and maybe looking at the screen and checking out a few things there. But in fact, your eyes are moving all over the place. If we took this video and slowed it way down, we'd see they're called saccades. They're little movements of your eye all over. And your brain, first of all, is seeing everything upside down, and it flips it over because that's how your eye actually projects it, is upside down. But not only that, it kind of fills in the gaps. And this is where magicians live, right? So they fool you by operating in the part where you're not looking right that moment. It's where optical illusions live. So you can fool your eyes into thinking certain things are there or things are the wrong color. And that's because your brain is manufacturing the vision that you have, but you actually can't see the stuff that's over on the side. You can't actually see things that you think you're looking at. And that applies all over the place. That applies to your beliefs about what other people are thinking and feeling. Oh, those tech people, they never listen to anybody. They like talking to their computers. They're not interested in customers. That's a belief that could be true, but there's almost always much less evidence for it and a lot more to it than you believe. But your brain fools you because it would be just too painful to try to deal with all the details all the time. Your brain fools you into thinking you actually know that. And that's naive realism, the idea that what you are seeing and thinking about and what you are observing is the real thing. And it's a skill, just like race walking, and we use that all the way through, that you have to practice to break that down. So just like they train themselves to keep their feet on the ground all the time, rather than picking up their feet as they run along, you have to train yourself to say, I don't actually know that. And actually the biggest signal, you can find this in Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. The biggest signal that you're falling victim to naive realism is your certainty. So when you say, well, I'm really sure that the people over there in Singapore, they don't understand our company mission. That's got to be true because they're so far away. That's when you say, but I haven't checked that. Maybe I should go to Singapore. Maybe I should phone them up. Maybe I should check out whether that's actually true or not. And if it is, you get evidence. Fantastic. But often you'll find out, actually, there's a couple of them who really have some insights over there that we haven't even thought of on this side of the water. And that breaking down of your automatic naive realism is something that you're going to have to do for the rest of your life. It's just like, Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody, pumps iron every day. So to keep looking like he does, you're going to have to practice every day breaking down your naive realism. And it's painful. It's not fun. But if you do that and if you practice at it, you can get very good and you can get tremendous insights that aren't available to others who aren't practicing.
When I was in graduate school in psychology, I remember there's something connected to naive realism, because I do love naive realism, and it's called illusory correlation. We make these illusions that are correlated, right? One of the most common is every time I wash my car, it rains, right? It's this illusory correlation. But we do this with people, right? It's our heuristic that we do, and it's part of Kahneman's System 1 thinking, right? We make this very fast, quick heuristics, and we make judgments very, very quickly, and we do these in the conversations. I think it's so important, and I'm glad. I was hoping you hit naive realism, because it is a common theme throughout this book that we have to combat, which is why later in this chapter you talk about defense versus product reasoning, why what we do and what we say we do. And Dr. Chris Argyris, did I pronounce
it perfectly? Wow, you win an award. Not many people manage that. That's where a lot of these ideas come from. These kind of dusty 1970s articles by this brilliant guy named Chris Argyris, who unfortunately far too few people have ever heard of, partly because he wrote completely unintelligibly. He was very academic.
Very academic guy.
And hard to follow, but tremendous value, especially to those of us who like step-by-step practice, who like black and white solutions, do this, then do that, and then do the next thing. Guess what? That's us IT people, right? So it's really valuable for us, but also for everyone else. Anybody who likes a For Dummies book, that's something that helps you go step-by-step on what to do. And there are lots of steps you can follow. There are practices you can do. If you practice them over and over again, you start to break down your naive realism and you start to have productive reasoning instead of defensive.
Well, we're going to talk about Dr. Argyris quite a bit throughout this book, as you pointed out, that he's going to talk about. But one of the things he talks about is he argues for the term of Model 1 theory of action or defensive reasoning. Talk to us about defensive reasoning and that mindset, and help us understand that clearly, because that's going to come up again here too as well.
It certainly will. And I'm actually going to talk about Model 2 first, because it's easy to contrast. Yeah. If I were going to ask you, Jay, let's get together. You come on over here to Frogholt, you see my house, and we're going to go to lunch. And we're going to take a few friends with us. How would you go about deciding where to go to lunch? You're in a country you don't live in. You don't know very much about what's there. How would you discover where to go to lunch?
Probably I'm going to ask somebody who lives there, probably you. I'm probably going to go to you and go, hey, Squirrel, what do you recommend that we go to lunch? Because you're there, right? You're
going to get information from the group, and then you're probably going to contribute some. So if I say, hey, let's go to the radish salad restaurant, and you don't like radishes, you might share the information that, hey, radishes ain't my thing. Let's get something else, right? Let's go to a nice traditional English pub. So the information you would gather is both from yourself and from others. And you'd probably ask some questions of other people to discover what they liked. And if somebody else doesn't like radishes or pubs, then we'll go somewhere else. That's what you do when it doesn't matter. And that is productive reasoning. The problem is that we all think we behave that way. Back to naive realism, right? We think we see the world the way it is. We think that we're behaving in that way. But if you actually go and look at what people do, what they say is, well, this is really important. It's not like lunch, which we could do anything. We're just going to have whatever we feel like. But now, it's the future of our company. We could fail. We could put thousands of people out of work if this fantastic project doesn't work. So it's really important we get it right. So I need to win. I've got the right answer here. And what I need to do is make sure that I come out on top with the right answers, and I convince other people that they should think like me. And if your listeners and viewers think about their last time they had something of high consequence at work, and maybe if there was an unproductive conflict, there were people butting heads who both thought they had the right answer, and who both were suffering from the naive realism of thinking their answer was the only answer. And why do they do that? Because it's most natural in that situation to think, I need to win, you need to lose, I need to make sure that my ideas get across, and I don't want to share too much of my information, because if I share too much, it might give ammunition to the other side. I want to make sure I come out on top. And the place you can see that reasoning most often, and you guys I know are in the middle of a political season here, if you go on any Sunday chat show, and you have the people from one side and the people from the other side, and they're both talking about some issue, you notice that they never come along and say, Jay, you just made a really good argument that we should have more immigration. I agree with you. Can I join your party? Right? That never, ever happens, right? They just come with their point of view, and they do what Argyris calls dueling ladders. They go up to the top of their reasoning, and they say, here's my conclusion, here's my conclusion. They just battle. Now, that's great drama for television, but it ain't so great in the boardroom. Right? Doesn't work so well when you need to get your IT team to build the right thing for you, get sales to take on a new direction, because what you're doing there is simply advocating and not inquiring. And when you do that, you don't get new information like you did with the radishes in the pub and so on, right? You were getting new information from the others and sharing information about yourself. So that's what Model 1 is all about, is operating in that non-defensive way when it really matters, which is when it's really tough.
That's awesome. I love that. Great. What a great way to do that. I love that.
And not natural, right? That's the thing. It's like race walking. It's not the way people walk.
No.
And they get there fast.
They do get there fast. He just may not be going where you hope you're going. His name is Douglas Squirrel, goes by Squirrel, co-authored this book with Jeffrey Frederick, entitled Agile Conversations, Transform Your Culture. Awesome. You're listening to me here on A New Direction. Hey, folks, whether you're recovering from an injury or surgery, suffering everyday aches and pains, maybe having difficulty performing activities, daily living, maybe a professional athlete or an athlete just wanting to move and perform better, listen to the elite team at Epic Physical Therapy will provide a customized treatment program just for you. So when you're ready for your epic relief, epic recovery, epic results, don't look any further. Go to epicpt.com. It's EPIC. PT.com, and Linda Craft Team Realtors for going on 40 years helping people transition in life. And you go, what? It's thought it's real estate. Listen, folks, every place we've ever lived has been a life transition. And so they know how to take the stress out of that part of that transition. They want to help you, and they have done it successfully with thousands of people. So when you're ready to sell or buy your house, make that next life transition, go to lindacraft.com, LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with Squirrel, and co-authored this, lead authored on this book, Agile Conversations, transforming your transform your conversations, transform your culture. It's easy for me to say.
You got there. It's okay. Don't worry.
I did get there, didn't I? So I do want to talk about that. There's something that you talk about in terms of transforming your conversations, and it's these 4 R's. And I think it's really important because this is part of setting up our one sheet. I call it a one sheet. Where we have the conversation on one side and what we're thinking on the other side, and so that we can transform it. And I think it's really important that we go through these. But let's talk about these 4 R's, and maybe there's a little buildup you want to give before we get right into it. But these 4 R's are critical for us to really dive in and dig into these fiber conversations that we're about to have.
Excellent. Well, you can think of them as like the leg lifts that those race walkers are doing, or their practice on the track, right? So you're not in the actual conversation, but what you're doing is you're analyzing it, you're figuring out what you can do differently, you're practicing, and you're coming up with something different. So I'll take you through the key steps. The first one that's most important, that really is the most unnatural part, is to record your conversation. And I don't mean turn on your phone and click the button and record it. You can do that if you want. That's totally fine. And we all have, now on Zoom, and we have these recordings and the AI things that record your conversation. You can do that if you want to. But the most important thing is to make sure that passing through your brain, the part that's not working, the part that's doing the defensive reasoning, the part that's doing the naive realism, is the information that led you to have the conversation. So a lot of people tell me, yeah, I had this difficult conversation. I didn't remember to record it, so I don't have an audio tape. Oh man, I can't analyze it. No, you still can, because you write down what you remembered about the conversation. And they say, well, I won't get the words right. Don't worry, you'll make all the same mistakes, because it's still your brain doing the interpretation and writing it down. And it's really important to do this on an actual physical thing that is distant from you. Some people think, oh yeah, I can do this when I'm driving, when I'm on the plane, I can just kind of think about it and analyze it. Yeah, you can, but it's not as good, because when you write it down on a piece of paper or on a screen, if that's what's best for you, but paper is even better, there's an important psychological phenomenon that happens, which is called self-distancing. This isn't social distancing, right? We all remember that. We're not doing that. Self-distancing is where it looks like, that Jay guy, whoever he is, he's written this thing, and boy, he's an idiot. Why did he say this? He was thinking this and he said that, but I don't think Jay's very smart. But you're Jay, right? But because it's on the paper, it feels like a different person. It's literally different neurons in your brain fire when you're dealing with something that's outside yourself than when it's inside. And so you can get more distance and be more thoughtful about how to practice. So that's the initial part, is recording your conversation by writing it down. And you record it in a particular way. And it does require a certain amount of skill. You have to take the piece of paper and fold it in half. And I hope everybody went to first grade and they remember how to do that, and fold it in half. And then you get a line down the middle and you put different things on different sides. So on the right-hand side, you write the words that everybody actually said. Let's assume it's 2 people. You can do this for more, but 2 is easier. So you and I are having a conversation. And you write down, Jay says this and Squirrel says that, and Jay says the other thing. Whatever the video camera would have recorded, you're not writing down there, Jay said angrily this thing, or Squirrel said sadly this thing. You can't see that. You can't. You can conclude that, and that's what you can write in the left-hand column. Now, Jay, I've got to ask you an important question. Are you telepathic?
No.
Okay, good. Sometimes people say, yes, I am, and I knew you were going to ask that question, so I'm glad you didn't do that. But and I bet your listeners are not. If any of your listeners are telepathic, please get in touch with me and Jay. We have some great business ideas we want to try on you. But I'm going to assume that most people I'm talking to here are not telepathic, which means on the left-hand side, you are only allowed to write down what you thought and felt, only the stuff in your head, because you don't know what the other person thought. Now, back to naive realism, you may think you know. I've known Jay for 20 years. I know exactly what he's thinking. He definitely thought this. No, you don't know that. That certainty is exactly what we were trying to break down here. So you only write down what you thought and felt. And you could write down, I thought Jay might be thinking this. That's okay. But you can't write down, Jay thought this. Now, when you get all that down, you can start to do analysis of it. And that's the reflection that you're going to do next. Because what you can do, and I'll give you the very simplest version, there's lots more in the book and lots of different exercises and things to try with this fundamental tool. But the easiest one to do is to wonder, was I curious? Because one of the characteristics of non-defensive reasoning, of productive reasoning, is to be curious and say, I might be wrong about this. I should ask. I should find out, rather than this kind of certainty that we've been talking about as some kind of a trap that can cause you trouble. So one really good signal that you've asked some questions is that somewhere on your piece of paper, there should be some question marks. So all you do is you take a red pen and you go zip, 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 and you find all the question marks. A very normal thing to do with any conversation you might record in this way is to find 0 question marks. And you might think you were really curious, but you find the question marks in the left-hand column where you're thinking, I wonder if Jay thinks that. But instead you said, Jay, I'm sure you think this. And you didn't actually ask a question. So you didn't show that you were interested, and you didn't give the other person a chance to tell you something. Or it might be you asked a question that's like this. Jay, I'm sure that you think this. Isn't that right? I'm sure that you want to grow your podcast and make more people listen. Isn't that right? And that's a leading question. It's not a genuine question. So you only get credit for the genuine ones, right? Where you are actually saying, it might be that you're interested in growing, or you might be happy where you are. Can you tell me what's important to you? That is at least one that I'm signaling is a genuine question. Only I know, right? If I'm thinking to myself, I'm sure he wants to grow, then I would not be being genuine because I'm fibbing. I'm being sort of articulate and fooling you. But if I really am thinking, I wonder how Jay thinks about this, I would be open to being surprised and hearing something that I didn't expect, like Jay wants to make his podcast audience smaller. If he told me that, I'd be really surprised and interested. That would be a genuine question. So that's the reflection step. You go through, circle all the question marks. Often you find none. And you say, okay, how have I done on being curious? Most of us do badly, including me, right? I wrote the book. I've been studying this for many years. I still have trouble with this. And I still find that I can improve in these areas. I still have to practice. And that's the next step, is then you're going to go back and say, how could I have asked questions? And often that left-hand side is a really great source because it's stuff you didn't say, stuff that was in your head. And you might be thinking to yourself, I wonder, boy, should Jay be, trying to grow his podcast in Europe? I mean, he's really popular in the US, but, is he considered Europe? But I never asked you that, right? I never got to that one. And so I can draw it out of the left-hand side and I can say, okay, what I want to say in this conversation when I try it again, because we're going to be practicing, that's the last R. When I pull it out, I'm going to write that question down. And I can also improve it. I can make it more productive. I can do things to it to make it a useful question. Or maybe there's no questions anywhere on the page and you have to really work. This is why I say this is tiring, right? This is a painful book. This is hard stuff to do. And we're only in chapter 2. But the point is that if you do this exercise and you do it regularly, you get good in the moment at thinking, I'm thinking a question here. Hang on a second, Jay. I think I should ask you a question. And here's a question I could ask you. I don't know what you think about this, but what do you think? And suddenly we're off on a much more productive direction, and we're having a productive conflict instead of an unproductive one. And then the final step is, now we've written down the new conversation, we've improved it, we've edited, crossed out, put new things in. We got to practice it. So we got to try it again. And to do that, it's most helpful if you have another person. 8-year-olds are great at this, by the way, because they love embarrassing grown-ups. But anybody you can get who's willing to kind of play the other side. Or if you can't, you can use a mirror and do both sides yourself. You can use ChatGPT and say, would you be my angry boss and, act like this? And ChatGPT is actually quite good at making stuff up. So good. It's like an actor, it'll help you. So pick your favorite way to then try your new method. What I'm going to do is make sure to ask whether this person thinks that my performance was good or not, rather than just assuming they thought it was good and then ask them how to do more of it. I'm going to make sure I ask them first, and then they practice it, and you practice it again, and you practice it again. And this is very painful, but eventually it gets natural for you. And then in the real situation, you can say, it's time for me to ask for that feedback. I know it's painful and it scares me and I don't like it, but I know it's time to ask for feedback and I know I'm going to get something really valuable from it. So there's an example of how you go through all the steps to make sure that you're practicing and improving that muscle So you're able to break down that defensive reasoning and get to productive conflict instead.
It's so hard for us to be curious when we've got our own agenda.
We're sure we're right. I mean, of course, everybody must think this way. That's how I thought.
Right.
I got here. It was painful, but they must
Right.
think the same way. And all I got to do is convince them to act.
Right.
Oh, that's the danger. That's
Right.
not correct.
And then you went in this chapter and you made us stop actually at the reflection area and said, we have to be able to distinguish feelings from thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
distinguish between what we feel and what we think we are, and distinguish between what we feel and how we think of others' reaction or behavior toward us. This is where you talk about building a vocabulary for feelings, because you say this, we often say, I feel, followed by a thought, as in, open quote, I feel like we made the wrong choice, close quote.
Yeah.
If we can substitute I feel with I think, then we aren't really expressing an emotion. And this is really critical. This is a very critical step, because we do confuse feelings and thoughts.
Absolutely.
And
it's
we're
much
not
safer to talk about, well, I feel this way because I don't have to kind of justify it, but then to give a thought, which is one of those kind of unquestioned, unconsidered, naive realism things. And what's more powerful, but painful and threatening and scary, and you have to work on it to get better at it, is to say, I feel sad, and I feel sad because you didn't deliver on time. But that's so powerful. If you go read 1 Minute Manager or any of those about sort of how to give great feedback, one of the things they tell you to do very clearly is share your emotion, but share your emotion with a feeling word, like I feel angry, I feel disappointed, I feel embarrassed, because that lands really sharply. And the other person may strongly disagree, but then you're having a productive conflict. I can't see why you'd feel embarrassed by me not delivering, because actually it was your fault in the first place. Well, man, I'm learning something there. It may not be much fun, but boy, I'm getting somewhere. I understand what this person's thinking. I may be discovering an error of my own. So much more powerful. And it starts by sharing the feeling with a feeling word.
I think it's also interesting that you said, when you talk about distinguishing what we feel and how we think of others' reaction and behavior toward us, is that, and this is what you said, this is perhaps the most difficult of the guidelines to apply, because we will often say, I feel ignored, or I feel misunderstood, or something similar, when we're actually not. We're making a statement about someone else, the other people, that they are misunderstanding us.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sharing an emotion either.
I gave a lecture to a client. I mean, I gave them a really hard time. I mean, I really gave them what for. In Stuttgart, when I was seeing a client recently, because he said, there's nobody listening to us. Our ideas aren't considered. These new initiatives, they come from somewhere else. I said, who does it? Stop using the passive voice, right? Stop saying that it's just this mysterious they who are out there somewhere. Who is it? And he said, well, actually, it's that person. And I said, have you ever met that person? He said, well, actually, no, I've never met her, but I know this stuff comes from her. I said, how do you know? You got to get off your butt and go find her. And she may be exactly what you think. And then you'd have a lot of evidence, and you could say, not just, I think this happens, or this is what I believe happens in this passive way. You could say, on Thursday at 2:00, this person said this. But even more likely, you're going to discover they don't think what you think. They're not doing the things that you think are happening. And in fact, that really was a breakthrough for that person. And that company's on a new direction now as a result of having that kind of interaction directly, instead of saying, oh, yeah, they are doing this stuff out there, and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think it's just really, really important that we get that clarity, because that's going to be something that's going to come up regularly, is that we're being very clear with our speech, but it also means that we got to be very clear with how we're thinking about things and how we're really feeling things. I think it's so important. So let's dive into chapter 3, which is called the trust conversation. And you say that the trust conversation is probably the most fundamental conversation.
You got to start there. People don't trust you. They won't believe anything else you're saying. So you're not going to get anywhere. But trust doesn't mean what a lot of people think. So if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see things about predictable behavior and stuff like that. For Jeffrey and me, at least, trust is shared and aligned stories. So I have a story about how the world works, and my story lines up with your story. We don't have to agree on it. I can say, well, Jay sees it this way, and we're up to chapter 3, we agree, but in chapter 7, our stories go sideways. That's okay, because then at least I understand yours, and I can use your language. You referred to this before. You said being careful with your language. Being expressive and thoughtful and using the other person's language is so valuable. I see this so often in tech organizations who talk all about scalability and server costs and security protocols and all kinds of other stuff that means nothing to the finance person. If they show up and they say, we can save $500,000 tomorrow if we stop doing X and we start doing Y, you got the person's attention if they're thinking about saving costs. Or if they're thinking about improving revenue, you show up and say, this is going to sell 5 more widgets every day. That's great. They want to sell widgets. But you have to start with understanding their story. And that's what the trust conversation is all about.
His name is Douglas Squirrel, goes by Squirrel. Author, lead author, co-author of the book, Agile Conversations, Transform Your Conversations, Transform Your Culture. Outstanding book. I'm just telling you, folks, it's going to require work, but it's work that it's well worth it. You really do want to get a copy of this, and you want to dig into it, and you want to apply it to every relationship that you have in your life, including your business relationships. We're just getting started and digging into it. You're listening to him here on A New Direction. Hey, folks, Epic Physical Therapy, my physical therapist. I think they should be yours too, by the way. Do you know they have some of the most top-of-the-line equipment available? Things like, I don't know, the Alter G anti-gravity treadmill, the Normatec compression sleeves, Game Ready, which is my favorite. That's just a few. They're trained and certified in the most comprehensive cutting-edge treatments available, like blood flow restriction therapy, dry needling, cupping, just a few. Listen, when you want your epic relief, your epic recovery, epic results, don't look any further. Go to epicpt.com. It's EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft Team Realtors. Listen, I want you to go and check out their website, lindacraft.com. It's LINDACRAFT.com. I am just telling you, it is one of the most comprehensive real estate websites that you will ever see or run across. It has everything from being able to see listings from all over the area to talking about how to move with children, how to move with pets, to discussing if you want to join the team, everything that you could ever possibly imagine about moving, getting prepared to move, what inspections are like. And even they have recommended vendors that they've worked with that they recommend over the course of their 40 years. So listen, when you're really ready to sell or buy your next home, start with Linda Craft Team Realtors. Doesn't matter where you live. They can find the right person for you because they're independently owned and operated, unaffiliated with any national company. So regardless of where you live in the world, start with them. They can help you find the best person in your area. Just go to lindacraft.com, LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with my friend Squirrel. Douglas Squirrel's his name. Agile Conversations, Transform Your Conversations, Transform Your Culture. And we are just starting into the trust conversation, which is the first of the 5 conversations. And I don't know that we'll make it through all 5, but you'll have to read the book to get the rest. That's kind of how this show works. We don't give you it all, but we give you enough that you go, I think I should get more, which available bookstores, Amazon, all over. If they don't have it on the shelf, at your favorite bookstore, tell them to get it because they need to have it on the shelf for sure.
Or show up at douglassquirrel.com and I'll send you a signed copy.
Or show up to douglassquirrel.com and he'll get you a signed copy. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to put that on the blog post or the show notes that we'll have, and we'll have that link live so that you can click on there in case you forget how to get there. You can go to the blog post and you'll be able to do that from there. In each one of these 5 conversations, you talk about we have to do some preparation. And in preparing for our trust conversation, the very first one is be vulnerable. This is not easy. Walk us through vulnerability and the importance of vulnerability in the trust conversation.
Well, the good news is we've been talking about it all the way through, although we didn't use that term. And the crucial thing to do there is to abandon your naive realism. This is hard, right? So you're not thinking to yourself as you walk around every day, I'm probably wrong about that. I've probably mistaken about this. And this belief I've had for years, it's probably erroneous in some important ways. But getting in that habit is tremendously helpful for then being vulnerable in the trust conversation to the idea that your story, remember we were talking about aligning the stories, getting things to line up, at least as far as you can with the other person and understand theirs. But that might mean you have to move yours. So, one of my favorites is somebody will tell me, and it's similar to that story in Stuttgart I was telling you, that company, somebody in the company says, those people over there, they're just not listening. They give me all these directions. They're headed in a direction that's not helpful, and they just don't understand. And when you actually go and ask them, they say, yeah, you're right. We're headed in the wrong direction. You go, what? What do you mean? What you agree with me? And they say, yeah. And actually our direction is coming from the board of directors. There's this other people over there. They're this way. And we got to go deal with them. And so you've been blaming them all the time because that's where the information is coming to you from. You say, oh man, sales is way off. They're doing the wrong thing. But they're just as frustrated as you are. They want to do something different and they're held back. So your corrective action has been directed the wrong way. And I can't count for you the number of folks I coach who wind up discovering that they've been banging their heads against a wall all the time, when in fact the people at the other end would love to come and bang their heads against a productive wall. They'd love to go deal with the actual problem. And that's threatening. It's scary to do. But when you are vulnerable in that way and you say, I might be wrong, my information might not be valid, here's the way I see it, but I'd sure like to hear how you see it, because I would like to hear where I have got something that is off track. And if you can produce that regularly, and you have to practice because it doesn't come naturally at all, then you will discover things that you would never have believed. And that mindset is really crucial to asking the genuine questions we were talking about before, and then going up the ladder of inference, which is the technique for the trust conversation.
The next thing you talk about being prepared for is being predictable. Because you say vulnerability alone isn't enough. Talk about being predictable.
So that's where you're sharing your own story. So you're being vulnerable and saying, my story might be wrong, but I also better tell you what I'm actually thinking and feeling. And this is so dangerous. It's so challenging that a lot of people, when it matters, don't do it. You'd be happy to tell me you don't like radishes when we're going to lunch. But if I'm telling you about, excuse me, I'm allergic to not predictable. But if I come to you and I say, why are you taking your podcast in this direction? Why are you working on your radio show in the way that you're doing it? You might not want to tell me everything. I might be a competitor. It might be threatening to you. You don't know quite what my agenda is. It's dangerous to you to share that with me. But if you do, then I might tell you, hey, actually, if you're trying to grow in this demographic, I have a great connection over there that I could help you with. So if you can share your story and be predictable, then, for example, the next time I talk to people in an area that you're interested in growing into, I'll say, I got a great guy named Coach Jay. He's got this great show and he would be really great for you. And I can then produce help for you. But I have to know your story. I have to know what you're actually after. If you just show up and you say, yeah, I'm interested in synergies of business directions and helping people strategize for great success, I haven't heard anything. I don't know what you're talking about. But if you show up and say, I want to challenge people to grow in 4 key areas like you did at the beginning, and here are what the 4 are, and I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested in any of those 4, I got something I can work with, right? Then I can predict your behavior, and I can say, oh, Jay's going to talk about the 4 directions. I know that's what he's going to do. He's going to give me a score at the beginning of every show. And because you're predictable like that, your listeners know how to apply what you bring and what your guests bring. And as you have conversations with people about how to grow your show, you can say, this is where I'm growing. This is what I know. So you're doing it great and you're being a supermodel. What I'm encouraging everybody to do is to do that in their business, which is quite threatening and challenging. Guess what? It needs practice.
You're one of the very first people who ever put the connection together of why I do the interviews and why I do those 4 things up front, because you're the first person to make that connection. That I'm actually doing it to say, okay, you can raise your level, right? From this, by the end of this show, you're going to raise your levels, right? Because it is going to affect you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And you're the first person who's made the connection. But it's absolutely true. It's the absolute truth. Why I opened the show that way is that you should, but by the time you finish the show, Your number should have changed. If you were a 2, you should be a 2.25.
And that's predictable. Your listeners are used to that. People who've listened to you over and over again know, okay, now I've moved from a 2, 2.5. Yeah. Now I went up to a 3. Now I'm down to a 1. Wait a minute, what happened?
Right.
Because they know that. They know what to expect from you and then what to listen for to help them move up from that 1 to a 5.
It's the first time I ever talked about it on the show. Very first time. Yeah.
Excellent.
So it's really cool that you brought that out. Let's talk about the conversation, test-driven development, TDD. You talk about that quite a bit throughout the book too, as well. And then the ladder, I think, is really important. The ladder.
So this is one of those places where I'm speaking to those technical people. So I'm not going to use the technical language here, but there's a thing that technology people do, which feels like something that we all do and we all know about. I don't know if you live in a part of the country where it gets icy or where there's snow. Does that happen to you, or have you been someplace?
Not too often here. I'm in the South. So it's
okay, got it. But I bet it happens sometimes, and when it does, you have to be super careful. Because when you start walking, we're back to race walking. You don't do race walking. You're like super careful walking. You're like, oh man, I got to check out. Should I put my foot here or there? You don't want to slip and fall down. And so a trust conversation feels like that. It's like walking, but slow and careful. And you're following a series of steps, and I'll let people read the book to get the individual steps. But the idea is that you start with stuff you can see and hear, and then you go on to what was important about that. And you're building up the other person's story as you do this, because they may not see and hear the same thing as you. It's amazing when I teach people this. I tell them, start with that first rung. And they go, oh, well, everybody agrees on what they can see. We all see it. It's right over there. And you show up and you say, well, of course, you guys in sales, you see that our customers are unhappy. They say, no, our customers love us. They hate you and your IT and your technology that's full of bugs, but they love us. And you say, man, wait a minute. We don't even see the world the same way. No wonder we have unproductive conflicts. No wonder when we get up further on the ladder, when we share more of our stories, we're on different planets. So you have to start at the bottom. And then as you move up, you get into things like meaning and conclusions. And then eventually you get to things like beliefs and actions, which drive what the other person is doing. And all the time you're sharing what you're doing and you're testing. Do you see it the same way or do you see it differently? And almost always you'll fall off the ladder at some point. You'll start moving up the rungs and you say, well, those things that we both agreed that we observed, I think they mean this. And you say, no, they don't mean that at all. This isn't how it works. This is what the meaning is. And that's where the real learning is. And that's why you have to be vulnerable to start with so that you can be ready to hear that and catch it and say, hang on a second, Jay sees the world differently from me. I don't have to agree with him, but man, I sure do understand why then from that meaning, he goes on to this conclusion, he goes on to this belief, he goes on to this action. And when you build that up, you can then use the other person's language when you want to collaborate on something. You can show up, and I was using the finance example before. You go to finance and you say, our mission is to get our costs down. I got 3 different ways to bring our costs down. Which one would you like to hear about first? You've got a much more productive conversation. You're building trust through that by using their language. Then if you show up and you say, I got 3 great ideas, and they're all going to really revolutionize our business and change our customers. And they say, all we care about is costs. Why aren't you talking to us about costs? So if you use their language as a result of having built up the trust, you have a much more productive discussion.
This is so good. So good, building trust. And we've done it. We've done our hour. And we've only made it through trust. I don't know if you'd be open to coming back and talking about a couple more
of these
at a future time, but I would love to dig into more of this because there's fear. There's the fear conversation, which I think is so important. Well, they're all so important. Fear, why, commitment, and accountability. And I know that we've got all these people, by the way, thank you everybody for who's tuning in right now live. We got a bunch of you out there who are watching live the show. Just as a reminder, we are on DBTV. DBTV, you can find that on a Roku, Fire Stick, smart TVs. You can find us on the app, DBTV. We are now 6 a.m. You can watch the shows 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. You can
while you're doing your race walking exercises.
Yes. So while you're doing your race walking, you can also watch.
That's what I'm doing at 6 a.m. anyway.
Yeah. So you can do that. But Squirrel, tell people how they can get a hold of you because this is so good.
It's easy to do. So there's 2 places to go. The one is really easy because you've been saying my name so often. It's really nice. That is douglassquirrel.com. And when you go there, you'll find lots of stuff about my history and how I work with people and all the different organizations. It's hundreds now around the world. I haven't got to Antarctica yet, but I've hit every other continent. So you can see all that stuff about me. But I also run a community, and the community is for tech and non-tech people to collaborate on making tech really profitable, getting the most out of all this technology that we all use and figuring out what it's all about. So that's called squirrelsquadron.com. And we have great conversations. Guess what? On there, all about the latest news, how people are struggling with offshoring or with their IT team that isn't doing what they need, or just trying to figure out should they be using AI or not. So all of those kind of discussions are happening on squirrelsquadron.com. And all this stuff is free, by the way. So, DouglasSquirrel.com has loads of ideas and articles and fun stuff there. Squirrel Squadron is a free program. I do that as my way of giving back. So I'd love to see any of your listeners and viewers on either place.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Stay with me. Folks, it's a show. You know what I say to you every week, right? Your control 4 things: your attitude, your effort, and your resiliency. The fact of the matter is that you choose, regardless of what happens to you in your circumstances, what your attitude is going to be. Your effort is tied to your excellence. So how excellent will you choose to be today? And we all get knocked down. We get punched in the mouth or punched in the gut, but it's up to you to get back up. And let me tell you something, get back up, because you are in fact worth it. I promise you, you are. I'll be back next week with another great guest. It's going to be another great book. It's going to be another great show. You've made a lot of choices. You chose us. I am so very grateful that you did that. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube if you watch us there. And wherever you're listening to us, you know what? Why not give us a 5-star positive review too as well? We appreciate that so much. And as I say to you all over the world, you know what that is. Ciao, everybody.